Hi everyone, welcome to our next installment of our video series. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. We're going to have these videos on many of our social media platforms, but definitely on YouTube, and then our school account, SKOOL. If you don't know what school is, it's a community that we're trying to build where you can even chat on a community forum. We're going to input a lot of videos, instructional stuff on there, just to be able to educate you a little bit better. So go ahead and check that out. We look forward to building that community this year. So without further ado, today we're going to talk about probably one of the biggest hurdles that people have when they get into fly fishing, which is bugs. So we're going to have a full bug talk of just some basic understandings as to what bugs are, how their life cycle goes, how to basically identify them, and even how we imitate them with artificial flies. So we're going to start with the life cycle, and then we're going to go into the identification of the three different categories of bugs out there. So let's start from the beginning. So when I look at trying to explain the bug life cycle to people, I try to just give the best illustration that I can out there for you to compare to. And for me, which most people understand, is the butterfly life cycle. So as a father of 5 kids, yes, I know that's a lot of kids, read a lot of books. And one of the books that's just been through all the kids is The Hungry Little Caterpillar. And in the very beginning, one of the first lines is, "A little egg lay on a leaf." And that little egg, same thing goes for the insects that we're talking about here, which live their full life cycle in the water. So these are aquatic bugs that we're trying to imitate with artificial flies, that their full life cycle is in the water. Compared to bugs that we call terrestrials, which might live outside of the water. So an ant, a beetle, a grasshopper. Today we're going to focus on those aquatic life cycle bugs. So a little egg lay on a leaf. Well, a little egg lay in the bottom of the creek. So these super microscopic eggs are going to be laid by the female, drop down to the bottom of the surface, whether it's a creek, a river, a lake, anything like that, and it's going to go all the way down to the rocks, the sand, the gravel, and the dirt down there. And eventually, within a small amount of time, it's going to hatch into what we call a nymph. So a nymph is imitated by a lot of different artificial flies out there, and the main reason for that is that the vast majority of the life cycle time frame is going to be in this phase. So the nymph phase is going to last almost 99% of the entire life cycle here. So most bugs, with a few exceptions, are going to live for a full year. And this nymph phase, I'm just going to roughly say, is 364 out of 365 days. So what happens is that egg goes into a nymph, hatches into a nymph, and then just like reptiles out there, they're going to grow, and then they're going to grow too big and they need to shuck their exoskeleton. So they're going to go through this phase. The phase, not to get too complicated or have terminology, is called instar, I-N-S-T-A-R. So they're going to grow, they're going to shuck their exoskeleton, they're going to be a little bit of a lighter color at that point in time, and then they're going to grow again. So that lighter color, honestly, I think that's why a popular pattern like a waltz worm or a hare's ear in that light tan color works so well and has for decades, is because it matches that little lighter color. But I digress. So we're going to grow, we're going to shuck the exoskeleton, we're going to grow. They're going to do that probably about 5 to 7 times on average, and continue to grow into the larger size bug that they need to do before they hit full maturity. So when we think about this, you also have to think about the time that you're fishing too. So, most of the bugs in our area, especially, in some of our healthy streams, are going to hatch anywhere from March through June. So if you're fishing in November, or even earlier in the season in February, if we don't have 2 feet of snow like we have on the ground right now, those bugs are only halfway through that growth cycle. So they might be at 14 when they hatch into an adult. They might be at 22 right now, 4 months before they're ready to hit that full size range. So remember to downsize your flies if you're not in that regular part of the season. Fish those 18s, 20s, even 22s at times. So anyways, now we've had that full growth cycle all the way through the instar phases, and now we are reaching the maturity age of our nymph. What's going to happen next is, if this is the water column in the stream or river, since we as fly fishermen mainly fish moving water, now that bug is going to swim to the top of the surface. So they are not great swimmers. Some of them are okay, but they're going to swim to the top of the surface. So now they're from the rocks all the way to the surface of the water, and they're going to do that. This stage here is called the emerger. So they are going to transition to the top here, and they're going to emerge out of their last nymph shuck into an adult with wings. So we have emergers that are in the water column. So you might have an emerger that still has a bead on it because it's fishing the middle of the water column. And then once they get to the surface, they're going to do that last exoskeleton shuck, come out of that last shell, and they're going to be a winged adult. So we also have emergers that are going to be in the film or right in the surface of the water. And that's a transition phase where it might have part of the fly underneath the water and part of the fly on top. So a very popular emerger pattern out there is the clink and hammer, and it's got a tuft of polywing or something like that on top, and then the bottom of it is a curved hook, which is the nymph coming out of its shuck. So now we've got this emerger stage, which is a very vulnerable stage for these bugs to be able to come to the top of the water. And that's a great opportunity for fish to eat them. So we see a lot of times when they're in this transition phase where the fish are very, very actively eating because they're not hiding around in the rocks like they were for the nymphs and maybe kind of floating around every once in a while. Now they're exposing themselves to the middle of the water column, and this is a great opportunity for fish to eat them. So typically this happens earlier in the morning. Most of the bugs are going to hatch throughout the late morning, early afternoon, and this is going to happen early morning into the early afternoon when they're in this transition phase. So now they've come to the top, they've shucked their exoskeleton, and now they're a winged adult. So think of the caterpillar stage as the nymph, and now we're in that chrysalis real quick to the butterfly stage. If you've ever seen a butterfly hatch out of the chrysalis, or even if you've got cicadas in your area and you've seen a cicada come out of its last shuck, it takes a while for those wings to dry. And the same thing happens with these bugs, is they're going to be floating down the water, they're going to be kind of fanning at times, trying to get their wings to dry off. They might even fly, fail a couple times, and come back on the water before they're fully dried. So once again, another vulnerable stage for these fish to come up and aggressively take the flies that are trying to get their wings to dry. So just as a recap, egg, nymph for most of their life cycle, emerger to a dry fly. We're going to talk about the differences of these in the three categories of bugs later, but this is kind of the basics here. So now we've got a dry fly, and that flies off to the local foliage. So if you've seen some fish activity on your stream or lake or river or wherever you are, and you're not quite sure what it is, go to the local banks of where you've been fishing and look at the grasses and the twigs and the trees and the big leaves around there, and you're probably going to find whatever bug's been hatching off, because they're going to go hang out there for at least a couple hours to a day. So in certain instances, which we'll talk about later too, you're going to have a second molt as an adult with mayflies. We'll talk about what a mayfly is. So that's going to be another adult shuck that's going to come out again in another molt and turn into what we call a spinner. The last stage is usually in the evening, and I say usually because we as fly fishermen, and especially those like me that really like dry fly fishing, we call this the power hour. So I will go out fishing starting at 7 or 8 o'clock. Because all those bugs throughout the entire day that have hatched are now coming back to the creek to fertilize eggs, drop eggs, and finish their life cycle. So here's what's going to happen. Typically those bugs are going to start at the tops of trees. So if you're out there fishing and it's just starting to get a little bit dark and you look up at the tops of trees and you see clouds of bugs, it's probably going to happen. It doesn't always. We get fooled every once in a while, but it's probably going to happen. So what's going to happen is those bugs are slowly going to descend from the tops of the trees. The males and females will attach their abdomens. You'll see them flying around usually a little bit above eye level within 10 to 20 feet of the river. And then once those eggs are fertilized, the females will continue to hit the water and slowly drop their eggs. What happens after this is just like the salmon that are coming in to spawn. Once they're finished spawning, they die off. These bugs, the same thing. Once they've fertilized eggs, dropped eggs, both males and females are going to die on the water. So now we've got these fish that have been chasing live bugs moving all day long. And why we call this the power hour is most fish, especially wild fish that have been acclimated to this for years and years, know what's going on. So instead of them chasing after bugs, now they can sit in a good run and wait for the food to come to them. So it's just a conveyor belt at that point. Now you've got these dead bugs that are just kind of floating down the stream. And these fish are going to come up and just take bug after bug after bug in a good run or current there. So if you know what you're doing, you can be properly prepared and show up with those spinner flies and maybe catch, 8 to 10 fish in an hour, or at least get a lot of opportunities in that last power hour of daylight before we get into too much darkness. So that's the full life cycle from egg to nymph, emerger, dry fly that flies off, spinner that comes back, mate, die, drop eggs, start it all over again. So that's our full life cycle. If you have any questions on any of that, we're more than happy to answer any questions or get into more specifics from there. Now, after we've covered that, let's talk about the basic identification of what I call the 3 categories of bugs. There are other bugs that do live in the water that we're not going to cover, things like dragonflies and midges, but these are the ones that the fly fishermen really target. So first and foremost, and why I like to start with this, is a caddisfly. Caddisflies like to live in a wide variety of healthy systems. So you can be in a silty, dirty river and they're still going to be there, and then a super clean spring creek and they're going to be there as well. So a caddis, an easy way to identify that is it kind of looks like a moth. So if you flick your porch light on in the middle of summer and see all these moths come around, a caddis is going to look very similar to that. So they're going to range, most of the sizes that we see here locally are maybe a 14 to an 18. There are bigger, there are smaller, but that's a good range. They're going to be tan, they're going to be brown, even an olive or a green. But the big identifying factor when you capture the adult is it has one set of wings lays flat on its back. Okay, so 14 to 18 size hook, one set of wings flat on its back. Some of the differences compared to some of the other bugs we're going to talk about is these caddis, as a nymph, we don't really call them a nymph, we call them a pupa. So they're actually going to look a lot like a little caterpillar. Some of them are free swimming. Some of them are going to make their own homes out of dirt and sticks and gravel. So they're going to make a casing, what we call them. So if you're flipping over rocks as you're walking down the river and you see what looks like a stick on the bottom of a rock and you go to pick it up and it's stuck, it's probably a caddis casing. So they're going to build that little home out of the sticks and gravel and silt and rocks and everything else down there. And as they grow, eventually they're just going to go out of that casing and they're going to swim to the top of the water and move into their adult phase. Some of them actually move into the adult phase mid-water column, and then they'll burst out of the water from there. So just a couple species, you don't have to worry about that. One thing that I failed to mention earlier is different kinds of rises. So you might see a flash underneath the water, probably taking a nymph or an early emerger. Those bugs, as they're really trying to come out of that shuck in that water column just below the surface or in the film, what I like to call is the toilet bowl flush. Is that those fish are coming up and grabbing them like that. And usually they're coming on a turn. And you'll see that flush of the toilet bowl there. So that's a good indicating factor that those fish are eating some sort of an emerger. When they're floating down, you're going to see a true rise form. You're going to see one that comes up. It might be very slow because there's a ton of bugs, or it might be aggressive because that bug's moving around. And then last, on that spinner fall, you're going to see those sips. You're just going to see that bug disappear because it's dead and floating down and that fish doesn't need to chase it. So, caddisflies, as I digress back to that. One set of wings flat on its back. The next one that we're going to talk about is a stonefly. So stoneflies will vary in size. We see the first ones of the year here locally are little black stoneflies or little brown stoneflies, and they're going to range from 16s, 18s, sometimes as small as 20s. Compared to out west, we see a lot of huge stoneflies like the salmon flies, golden stones, other big stonefly species out there that can get up to a 2. They're monsters. When I talked earlier about the 1-year life cycle and some of those exceptions, some of those big stoneflies have a 2 or a 3-year life cycle. So that's how they can get so big. So the big difference with stoneflies is, first of all, as an adult, if you capture one, they have 2 sets of wings, very long body. So when they're flying, it almost looks like a dragonfly. They've got 2 sets of wings there. If you're looking online and you're like, why can't I find a stonefly emerger pattern? And this is why. Those stoneflies as a nymph go to the shorelines to be able to hatch into an adult. They're very big, especially some of those big western ones. We see some here in the east too. But you'll see the stonefly shucks, the remaining shells as they hatch along the rocks, the grasses, the trees, on the shorelines there. So you're not ever going to see a stonefly emerger pattern because they're not in the water. So we're not going to imitate them that way. That being said, when we are seeing a lot of stonefly activity, we're typically fishing the edges of the rivers. So whether it's the nymph or whether it's a dry fly, once they do come out, they're all on those edges. They're big, clumsy bugs. A lot of times we're fishing those edges of the creeks for stoneflies when we see the stonefly dries happen. They can be, like I said, very large, especially the ones out west. Patterns like a chubby Chernobyl can be a great dry fly imitation for something like that. So there's our stonefly. Caddisfly, one set of wings. Stonefly, two sets of wings, flat on its back. The last one, which is the one that I would say most people are just drawn to, is the mayfly. So a mayfly has one set of wings. Yes, I'm simplifying it. Stands straight up on its back. Why I say simplified, sometimes they have a little hind wing there too. And it's maybe 20% of the size of the big one. But for simplification, one set of wings, when you capture it, its wings are straight up in the air like that. So those mayflies is really what I discussed, the full life cycle from nymph to emerger to what we call dun, is the stage when they first come out as a winged adult. The reason why they call it dun is that it's a blue-gray wing, which is dun colored. You probably never heard that color before except in the fly fishing world. So this bluish-gray wing is what they come out as a dun first, D-U-N, and then they're going to fly off to the local trees and foliage. Then they're going to do that last molt, so a molt from an adult to another adult, into the spinner. That spinner will have a clearer wing, almost completely transparent, sometimes some modeling or marbling to it with some other blacks and browns and things like that. Typically also, when they do that last molt, their tails extend out at least twice as much. So if you've ever seen that happen, you'll see their tails will go from that long to about that long. They can be super long at that spinner stage. Then they're going fertilizing eggs, dropping the eggs, and finishing their life cycle. So caddisfly, one set of wings flat on its back. Stonefly, two sets of wings flat on its back. And mayfly, one set of wings stands straight up in the air. So if you've come this far in the video and you've gotten this far, I'm sure you've learned a lot, especially if you're just brand new into it. Last, but certainly not least, is we need to talk about different flies and how to imitate those and a lot of other things out there. So when I'm picking fly selection for customers in the shop, they get very confused. First of all, they don't know the names of things. They don't know whether this is a mayfly or a stonefly or a caddisfly. If we can cut it down to understanding those three categories, here's the list of 3 priorities on fly selection for me. So number 1 is category. If I see a caddisfly and I throw a caddis imitation, I've got a good chance of catching that fish. If it's a mayfly and I'm throwing a mayfly imitation, good chance of catching that fish. If it's a mayfly and I'm throwing a caddis, my statistics are going down of catches. So fish the right type of bug first. Second is the right size of bug. If it's a 14 and I'm throwing a 20, probably not going to catch it. If it's a 16 or a 12 that I'm throwing and it's really a 14, I've got a little better chance. But if you're trying to get that species, that type of bug correct, and the size of bug correct, now your odds are going straight up in the air. Last, but still certainly not least, is color. Then Adam's fly out there, probably one of the most popular dry flies that we see out there, both in sales and how long it's been out there and the amount of people using it worldwide. There is no Adam's fly. It's an artificial imitation of absolutely nothing in terms of a mayfly imitation. But the reason why it works so well is just a medium gray color. It's got both a grizzly, which is a white and black feather hackle, and a brown mixed together. So it kind of matches everything but nothing all at the same time. But there are exceptions. So if you're fishing like a light cahill that's almost a pure white, you want to try to match that color as best as you can. Around here, one of our very popular hatches is a sulfur, which is a sulfur orange, like a yellowish orange color. If you have that yellow-orange color, you've got a better chance of catching fish than someone throwing a brown or a black fly, even though theirs might be a mayfly and the right size. So if you follow that rule of thumb and you open your box and you're like, I don't have exactly what I need, go type of bug, size of bug, color of bug in that order. I think if you do that, you're really gonna up your chances of catching fish on dry flies, but also same thing for nymphs too. So if you're flipping rocks and you're like, oh, I see this bug and it's a stonefly and it's size 12, well, let's see if I have a stonefly size 12 nymph out there as well. So follow that priority list. If you do, I think your success rate on the water is gonna be significantly better. That's the end of this video today. We appreciate you making it this far. If you haven't already, subscribe to all of our channels. And also, if you're interested in gear or any information, you can hop onto our website. So our company is Risenfly, www.risenfly.com. We have literally about 1 million flies in stock, rods and reels and boxes and fly lines and tools and hooks and beads and everything else that you think you're gonna need, we have on the site. We appreciate you following this far. Stay tuned for future videos, and thank you guys for watching.